Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the State of the University Address. Please welcome University of Tennessee Interim President, Randy Boyd.
To the beginning of the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee. Now, I know that sounds like a bold statement, and it is, but I believe that we have the talent to be able to make that a reality. It's meant as no disrespect to those that have come before us. There have been a lot of great decades in the past, and so we've got a big challenge ahead of us to be able to live up to that goal, but I believe that we can do it. So when I started saying this about a month ago, I realized that we need to do a little research and see what those other decades were like and who we're really benchmarking ourselves against. So I have an opinion about what the greatest decade is in the history of our 225 years as a university. And you can challenge that opinion. I'm going to share a few other decades with you, and you can choose for yourself, or you can do your own research and push back at a future time. But here's the decade that I think you might want to consider. So the 1790s, that's when we got started. William Blount was the first and only governor of the territory of Tennessee. And he had this idea that we needed to have a higher education institution west of the Appalachians in his territory. So he decided to create Blount College, named after himself, and he co-founded it with Dr. Samuel Carrick. Samuel Carrick became the first president of the university. The headquarters of the location of the university was between Clinch and Church, Gay Street, and State. For all those that have grown up here in Knoxville, you're trying to imagine where that is. It's exactly where the Tennessee Theater is now. So that was where the University of Tennessee was originally. So I think you have to include the decade that we were founded as one of our best decades, but here's a few other things to consider when you're making your choice. So we enlisted 13 students, or enrolled 13 students over a 13-year period. We had 5 females, which is great. We were one of the few universities in the country that had 5 females so early on. So we had 5 females. However, Samuel Carrick died 13 years later. We were broke, and so we ended up closing the university for 10 years. And of those 13 students, only 1 actually graduated. So if you think retention and graduation is important, you might want to consider that when you're ranking 1790. But it's definitely an important decade. 1860s is definitely one of our most significant decades. In 1862, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, Abraham Lincoln passed the Morrill Act, which created the land-grant universities across the nation. In 1869, under President Thomas Humes, we became the land-grant university for the state of Tennessee, and we changed our name from East Tennessee University to the University of Tennessee. And I read through why we did that was because we thought that would help us get more money from the state legislature. So always marketing. And we're still doing the same. And as a result of being the land-grant university, we created colleges in agriculture, in the military sciences, and in engineering. In the 1880s, I have to mention the 1880s because that was the decade in which the University of Chattanooga was founded in 1886. There's not a lot else that happened in the 1880s, but to my friends in Chattanooga, it'd be remiss if I didn't mention the 1880s as one of our great decades. 1890s could be a really strong contender for the greatest decade in the history of the university. In the 1890s, in 1890 itself, under Charles Dabney, we created the College of Law, and since then we've produced more lawyers than any other university in the state of Tennessee's history. For some of you think that's a good thing, you can clap. There's a few that few may disagree. We also started a teachers' college during the 1890s, and in the 1890s, it was the first decade we got our first appropriation from the state government. So I think that was also a big decade. Next to last would be the 1920s. In the 1920s, also in 1890, also incredibly important, in 1893, the Board of Trustees voted to allow females into the University of Tennessee. So a very significant decade. In the 1920s, a couple big things happened. One, we got our first $1 million appropriation from the state legislature. Again, very thankful for that. In 1927, or the Hall Moody Bible College became the University of Tennessee Martin. And so that was created in the 1920s. But my favorite decade, again, you have the right to disagree, but my favorite decade, and the one that I think that we're having to benchmark against, would be under Andy Holt in the 1960s. And there's so many great things that happened in that decade, it's hard to list them all, but here's just a few to consider. In 1961, Theodis Robinson became the first African American to be admitted and enter in the University of Tennessee. In 1964, we created the UT Space Institute. In 1968, we created the system that we have today, and UT Martin and UT Chattanooga joined our system. We also created the University of Tennessee's Institute of Agriculture. Also, and I'm going to cheat just a little bit and give Andy Holt extra credit and give him an extra year, but in 1971, we also created the Institute of Public Service. And so some tremendous organizational structural changes happened during those period of time. Also, and I was told that I shouldn't really talk too much about sports at any one campus, but I will anyway. At UT Knoxville in that decade, we created the checkerboard and the tradition of running through the Power T. So some fun things during the athletics. But maybe the most important thing would be our enrollment. We had an unprecedented enrollment growth during that period of time. I've been pushing our chancellors, not been pushing, we've been discussing with our chancellors the idea of big, hairy, audacious goals and striving for increases in enrollment. As a benchmark, from 1960 to 1970, UT system enrollment grew from 11,700 students to 37,400 students, a 300% increase. So an incredible growth. In almost every measure, you'd have to say that the 1960s was one of the most incredible decades in the history of the University of Tennessee. But I believe this next decade could be even greater. And I'm going to share with you in a few minutes a few reasons why I think that can be true. But first I want to take a pause and go back and say thank you for all of you that have come today. We've got a lot of legislators here. I don't want to, I'm afraid with the lights I may miss some, so I would first like to ask if all of our state legislators could stand up and let us give you a round of applause. I didn't want to mention, but we did make it 100 years without any legislative support, but we can never go back to that. We really appreciate, I was hoping that you wouldn't have noticed that, but we really appreciate your support. I also want to thank President's Council Alumni of the Year, Michael Strickland, for our lights. Michael, thank you very much. Also, I want to thank the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and our Chancellor, Don D. Plowman, for hosting us this year. Last year we did it, and the last 4 years we've done the State of the University address in Nashville. In the future, I believe we're going to start doing them on a rotating basis and going through all the different campuses each year so that we get a chance to share our message with all the faculty and staff and students at each of the campuses. And finally, I just want to thank everybody with the University of Tennessee system. If we're going to make this the greatest decade, did I just say that? When we make this the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee, it'll be because of our people. It's the people that have brought us here and the people that will be defining this next decade. And I think when the history books are written, it'll be many of you in this room. You'll look from side to side and you'll see that you're part of that history and that narrative. So a lot of history makers in the room. We also have our county and city officials, and I'm excited to see our city mayor, India Cannon, here with us today. Please stand. Thank you. And lastly, just one last thank you. And I just want to say to all of you, thank you for this privilege of being able to serve my alma mater. This is a dream come true for me. It's an honor, but it's also a great responsibility. I don't believe there's another position anywhere in the state that one can do more good for more people in the state of Tennessee than at the University of Tennessee. And so I take this responsibility seriously, and I'm just so pleased to be able to serve with all of you. And it wasn't by my plan or intention. Just a quick anecdote. So 2 weeks ago, I was at some student event, and one of the students came up to me afterwards and said, "So President Boyd, was it your plan all along to become president of the University of Tennessee?" So let me see. So I thought, you know, the best way to get there would be to start selling dog fences. Become a philanthropist in education, which will get you appointed to a governor that you will befriend, and then he will eventually appoint you Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, from which platform you could run unsuccessfully for governor and then become appointed as president of the University of Tennessee. It has been my plan all along. But, you know, I think sometimes, this is my personal belief, that God has a better plan for you than you do for yourself, and I couldn't be in a better place, and I'm so honored to be here and be able to serve with you. Well, so let's talk about how this can become the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee. We published our 2020 objectives with about 30 different initiatives that we're going to be working on this year. I'm only going to primarily talk about 3, and each of which fall under the 3 key areas of our mission of education, discovery, and engagement. We'll start with talking about education. Now, the good news is we've got a great platform to build on. Last year we had the highest enrollment we've ever had. We had a 1.5% increase in enrollment. We've enrolled 51,582 students. We graduated the most students we've ever graduated, 12,066 students. So we've got a great platform to build on. We also have a lot of initiatives that are going to support the primary initiative of getting more students into the University of Tennessee. We've got to do put more emphasis on online education. One of the things that we're behind, maybe other university systems, is our online education. There'll be a big initiative around that in the coming year. But a big part of that will be working together across our system. We don't need to duplicate or triplicate some of the program that we develop. We need to be able to work together on that. We also need to work on supporting our students around mental health. We just had the sunset hearing with the comptroller, and one of the things he highlighted was the fact that we needed to do more on mental health. Now, we've been doing a lot. Unfortunately, the crisis has been growing at a faster rate than we've been increasing our efforts. We need to double down, and so that's going to be another major emphasis. But one of the biggest things that I want to talk about is something that we actually announced last year at our State of the University, and that was the UT Promise. And so for those that weren't there, maybe for those that haven't heard this before, and even for those that have heard it before many times, I've been told repetition is a good thing. What we announced last year was something that we call the UT Promise, to make the University of Tennessee system, all of our campuses, more accessible to more students. Back to the Morrill Act under Abraham Lincoln. When Abraham Lincoln announced the Morrill Act in 1862, it was to provide a ladder up to the working class and to the middle class, provide an opportunity for higher education to students that wouldn't have otherwise had it. If you recall, before that, higher education was very elite universities in the Northeast, maybe Harvard or Yale, where students would go and learn about political science and government and theology. But the idea of teaching agriculture and commerce and engineering to the masses was totally unheard of. We're wanting to live up to that mission and to provide more access to our students. Now, we're really proud. I'm really proud of Chancellor Plowman and the UT Knoxville campus of actually having an incredible increase in their U.S. News and World Report rankings last year. They went from 52nd to 44th, almost a 20% increase. That's unheard of. And while we're proud of that, I'm a little hypocritical by saying I'm not really a big fan of U.S. News and World Report, and there's one big reason why. One of the reasons, or one of the ways in which you move up in the rankings is through your selectivity. How many students, and basically selectivity means how many students you reject. If you reject 80% of the students that apply, you're pretty high in the rankings. If you reduce 90%, then you really move up. You look at the top 5, 10 universities in the rankings, they're rejecting 95% of the students. And that's exactly the opposite of who we want to be. As the land-grant university, we do not want to measure ourselves by who we exclude. We want to measure ourselves by who we include. And so the UT Promise helps us to do that. The UT Promise says this: if you have a family income of under $50,000, and why $50,000? The median household income in the state of Tennessee is $48,000, so more than half of our population. If you have a family income of under $50,000, and you can academically earn the right to come to UT Martin, UT Chattanooga, or UT Knoxville, then you can come free of tuition and fees. We're the first and only system in the country that's ever been able to do that, and we were able to launch that at this event last year. So, thank you. And we hope this does at least 3 things. 1, it will make us more accessible to more students that couldn't otherwise afford. 2, we think it'll help with retention. Too often students drop out because of financial reasons. This will be one less financial burden that they'll have. And 3, it should reduce our student debt. You hear a lot about student debt in the press. Something to know, and this is a message that we need to get out, and I count on all of you to help us to share this, but student debt at the University of Tennessee is manageable. At the University of Tennessee system, 46% of the students that graduate with 0 debt. At the University of Tennessee Knoxville, 52% of the students last year graduated with 0 debt. This will help reduce that even further. There's 2 other key parts, though, to the UT Promise. 1, they're also going to be required to do community service. Now, that fits in perfectly with the volunteer spirit of our state, and whether you're a Mock or a Skyhawk or a Vol, everybody needs to do volunteer work, and it fits with the mission of our state. But the other key point of the program is that we're going to match them up with a mentor. And the mentorship is probably the most important part of the program. People will write headlines about the financial part, about free tuition and fees. The most important part about this program is the mentoring, making sure they have somebody to support them. And I was sharing with someone as we came in, if you could only leave this room today with two things, it would be this: an excitement about the future and signing up to be a mentor. So this is a close. If I'm trying to remember my ABCs, always be closing. I'm asking you to sign up as a mentor. So I've been a mentor in the Tennessee Promise program, which this was somewhat modeled after for 11 years now. Statistically, I can tell you that if you have a mentor with that program, there's a 400% greater chance that you're going to go on to college and graduate. We have the statistics after 11 years to prove that. So we know that it works. But I can tell you personally that it works. You know, one of the things you hear too often is about so many young people that are over-supported. Their parents are indulging them, and they tell them they can do things that they can't, and they get too much support. And that may be true. But in my personal experience, at least for every one of the children that are like that, there's another one that doesn't have that at all. I've been a mentor for 11 years. Every year, I have about 5 young men. I can tell you about Dustin. I want to tell you about Dustin 5 years ago, who was one of my mentors or mentees from South Doyle. So every year, and you don't necessarily have to do this in the UT Promise program, but for me, as a personal extra, I'd always invite everybody out for pizza the month before our first meeting, just to get to know them and their parents. Usually it was a parent, but at least we'd all get together and visit. And Dustin came with his mother. His father had been gone from his life many years before. And we had a great visit, and he was excited about going to Pellissippi State and furthering his career. He's hoping that he could graduate with a 2-year associate's degree and then come on to the University of Tennessee. About a month later, I talked with one of the counselors at the high school, and she gave me a little background about Dustin. She said that in Dustin's family, he was the caregiver in the house. He took care of his mom and his siblings. There wasn't the mother wasn't really able, for a lot of reasons, to be able to take care of him. Well, about 2 weeks after that, I got a call from Dustin, and he said, "Mr. Boyd, it looks like I'm going to have to drop out of the program. You see, my mom's gone. Nobody knows where she's at. And I'm living now with my brother-in-law and my sister." And my brother-in-law said, "Dustin, I'll give you a ride to Walmart or someplace where you can get a job, but there's no way I'm wasting my time taking you to some college." And we found transportation for Dustin, but there are thousands of young people like Dustin out there that don't have anybody that believes them, that says that they can actually do this. This mentoring is going to be the most critical part of the UT Promise, and you can play a key part. There's registrations in your chairs, and there's also a registration on the desk when you go out. I personally have signed up to be the first mentor. I know everybody's probably thinking, I'm too busy. I can tell you, Chancellor Palmer signed up, I'm signed up. We're kind of busy, but this is important, and it's important for you to sign up as well, and we would really appreciate you giving this don't give it serious consideration, just sign up. The second big area that we're going to make the greatest decade is in research. And we've had a great year. This past year, we had $424 million in research. It was a 2% increase. So again, a new record in research across our system. But we need to do more. And one of the best opportunities we have is through a partnership with Oakridge National Labs. We just recently took a trip to Israel, where we're going and introducing the University of Tennessee to universities in Israel. And a lot of times the universities would look at us like, why should we partner with you? By the way, we just had the University of Columbia here, or we just had MIT here. What's special about you? And you're trying to come up with something in a sentence. So, well, we are a land-grant university that is also the university's... Good. I love this. It's perfect timing. I should say something really dramatic at this point. And so we've created the Oakridge Institute. When we would tell when we would tell universities in Israel that we happen to manage one of the largest national labs in the country, it was all immediately they were excited about the opportunity to work with us. We have a great relationship with Oakridge National Labs, but we could do more. And so last summer we announced something called the Oakridge Institute. And the Oakridge Institute helps us put a wrapper around all the great relationships. Doesn't get any better. I always wanted a soundtrack. I just wasn't expecting it. So it puts a wrapper around all the great relationships we have with Oakridge, from the governor's chairs, the joint institutes, the 128 Bredesen Center fellows. But it also gives us a foundation to do more. We've been spending a lot of time talking with the Department of Energy about their needs. And areas that they've identified are areas like artificial intelligence, like quantum communications, like bioinformatics, areas of critical national security. And they've identified the Knoxville area with the University of Tennessee and Oakridge National Labs as one of the best areas in the world or in the country to be able to develop centers of excellence. So they're looking to us to be able to do that. And they've also given us an offer. If we can help match their investments, they will help us invest to create national centers of excellence in these three areas. And what this will result in, once executed, will be 120 new faculty members and 3 new centers of excellence with 500 new graduate students, all doing great science to help us become the center for this in the country. It starts with an investment from the state, and we're really proud to say and announce that Governor Lee, in his State of the State 2 weeks ago, announced that he was going to put $10 million in this first year toward launching this program. And we want to express our sincere thanks to Governor Lee. So the question is, what do we do now? We go. We're now in the process of building this and launching, and we couldn't be more excited. This could be the biggest science project in the history of the state of Tennessee since the Manhattan Project, and it's beginning right now, this decade, in Knoxville and Oakridge, so we're very excited about that. And the third and final area that helps us complete our mission and helps us make this the greatest decade is our engagement with the state. And we just got through having the University of Tennessee's Day on the Hill in Nashville this past week, and we were communicating to our legislators and our commissioners and our governor that we want to be a partner. We're not here just asking for things. We're here wanting to serve. And we believe that we have a role, a part of our mission is to serve the state of Tennessee. So we're looking for ways in which we can serve. We talked to the Commissioner of Tourism for about an hour on Tuesday and talked about some of the things that they're interested in doing. He was talking about his mission of taking tourism to rural communities and how he thought ag tourism could be a big anchor in those rural communities. Turns out that we have an ag extension agent in every single one of the 95 counties that already has an ag tourism program. We can partner and help him extend that mission. He was wanting to train local leadership in each of these counties and cities on how to develop tourism in their communities. We have MTAS and CTS as part of our Institute for Public Service that can deliver that training to every single city and county mayor across the state of Tennessee. We can be their partner. We also went and met with the Commissioner of Education. She's got $600 million in her budget this year to look at things like teacher preparation and to work on early literacy. No one trains more teachers than the University of Tennessee system. We want to be her partner at the table, helping not only develop the programs, to be the leader in those programs. She's coming to Knoxville in a couple of weeks to help sit down and help us launch that. But we also have the ability to identify the grand challenges of the state of Tennessee and be the leader to solve those. In my past experience, both as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development and in the process of applying for a job, I got to travel all across the state, meeting with communities about what their biggest challenges were. And unquestionably, in every community across the state, one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest crises that we have is opioids and addiction. And during my campaign, I learned a lot of stats. And I'd usually go to small groups, either 5 people, 10, sometimes 50 people, and we would talk about all these stats that maybe many of you have heard, like the state of Tennessee is in the top 3 in the country in opioid addiction and deaths. Usually, sometimes we're number 1, sometimes we're number 3, but we're always in the top 3. We're the same population as the state of Minnesota. We consume 10 times more pills per person than people in Minnesota do. And I had a whole list of those stats that I would share. But the thing was, and this is not an exaggeration, every single meeting that I went to, no matter how small or how large the group, besides the stats, somebody would come up to me and say, you know, I've lost a daughter, I've lost a son, I've lost a spouse to opioids. And so this hits home in every corner of our state. The great news is the University of Tennessee is uniquely positioned to solve this challenge. We have people at the Health Science Center that are working on prescriptions, working on training new protocols for our doctors. We're working at the College of Social Work here in Knoxville on behavioral determinants. At Oakridge National Labs, we have a governor's chair that has access to 1 million records of veterans and their health records and can use the supercomputer to do diagnostics, to be able to come up with predictive analytics around why some people would get addicted. We have people at the UT Medical Center that have done research on how to prevent NAS babies. We have all these different resources. The challenge has been they haven't been talking together. Last January, we had our first symposium or summit where we brought all of our UT resources together, but we realized that's not enough, that we needed the state and the nonprofit communities across the state to come together. And so last August, we hosted another summit where we brought all of the resources across the state together. We hoped that we could have 300 people come. When we announced it, we had 300 people sign up in the first month. By the time we had the summit in August, we had 700 people from across the state. It was the biggest gathering of people that are committed to this in the history of the state. And what it taught us was several things. One, we're nonpartisan. We're the trusted advisor. We can convene people that others might not be able to. And we also have 225 years of history. We're sustainable. We can identify challenges that are going to take a decade to solve. No other organization can do what we can do. And then we have the geographic reach, offices in every county in the state. We have the physical and the financial resources, and most importantly, we have the intellectual capacity to solve the state's grand challenges. One of those grand challenges will be opioids and addiction, and we are going to be continuing on with that work this year and then disseminating out across the state. So I think if we can do those things, if we can create that access and that success for the University of Tennessee and our students and create the workforce and the society that we are called to do, if we can become this great new research institution with what we can and live up to the capabilities of the Oakridge Institute, and if we can continue to engage with our state and be that servant to the state and the people of the state of Tennessee and solve those grand challenges like the opioids and addiction, I do believe that this can be the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee. Things that have to happen to make that true. One is going to start with the people. It's not really the policies or the programs, it's the people. It's about all of you. So we're going to be counting on each and one of you to help define this. And I look forward to, again, to be reading about you in the history books 10, 20, 30 years from now when they talk about how this happened. And finally, it starts with a single act. So you may be thinking, well, I'm not really involved in the University of Tennessee, or I've got other things that I need to do. I'm not involved in any of those programs. There's one thing that we can all do. We can all do it today, and that is sign up to be a mentor in the UT Promise. So I'll be counting on you to do that. Thank you all for being with us today, and thank you for helping to be at the start of the beginning of the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee. Thank you all.